Welcome to the United States of Africa.
I'm very proud. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
The 7th of August, 2025, Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. No parades, no flags, no red carpets. Just a firm voice on national radio and a sentence that rewrote history. From this day forward, any person of African descent, whether born in Harlem, Haiti, Kingston, or Kumasi, has the right to carry the United States of Africa passport. The speaker was not a diplomat, not a king, but a soldier turned statesman, President Ibrahim Traoré. And in just 13 words, he didn't just announce a travel document, he issued a global summons to the scattered children of Africa. Across the Atlantic, the impact was immediate. In Brooklyn, a grandmother wept watching the broadcast, whispering, "My name is coming home." In Barbados, a young artist painted the continent in gold on a black passport cover. In Accra, an elder shook his head in disbelief. They said it would never happen, but it happened. No longer was Africa just a memory, a longing, or a checkbox on immigration forms. With the stroke of a decree signed, sealed, and broadcast from Ouaga Traoré, transformed identity into law, and with it, dignity into policy. We were sold, we were renamed, but our blood never forgot, Traoré declared. It wasn't just poetic, it was constitutional. For the first time since the Berlin Conference tore Africa into pieces in 1884, a government stood up and said, "We recognize your exile, we recognize your return." This wasn't symbolic. The United States of Africa passport is legally recognized across the alliance of Sahelian states. That means free movement, preferential trade access, residency rights, even land ownership incentives for returnees. But above all, it means something deeper. It means that centuries of silence, of ships, of shackles and shame are being named, legally, publicly, irrevocably. Traoré didn't launch this through the UN. He didn't beg the African Union. He used a constitutional article passed in March 2025 through Burkina Faso's Sovereignty Act. Article 19 Ampere. All descendants of African civilizations forcibly removed by colonial slavery have the right to reintegration, citizenship, and state protection. That clause, once buried in legal drafts, has now become a lifeline, not just to Burkina Faso, but to a rising continental alliance seeking to stitch together what colonialism tore apart. Is it controversial? Of course. Washington called it an act of soft rebellion. Paris labeled it legally uncoordinated. But across the streets of Kingston, New Orleans, and Port-au-Prince, it's being called something else. Home. This isn't about Pan-African speeches. This is about government seals on documents, airports that no longer treat African names as foreign, and children who will never again ask, "Where do I belong?" The lines are forming, not just at embassies, but in hearts. Because for the first time in modern history, Africa is not waiting to be invited to the world stage. It is issuing the invitation. So who qualifies? What documents do you need? And what surprising rule has caught everyone off guard? Let's break it down step by step. But first, are you ready to reclaim your name? It's not automatic, and it's not for everyone. While the announcement of the United States of Africa passport sent waves of emotion across the diaspora, what followed was just as powerful and far more precise. President Ibrahim Traoré's government made it clear. This passport isn't a souvenir. It's a legal instrument, a right but also a responsibility. And like all rights, it comes with rules. As of the 7th of August, 2025, eligibility has been extended to anyone of African descent who can prove ancestral ties through one of three recognized pathways. First, official documentation, birth certificates, family archives, or state-recognized heritage records. These are especially common among African Americans, Caribbean nationals, and Afro-Europeans who've preserved ancestral links across generations. But what if you don't have papers? What if your family name was erased, rewritten, or lost at sea? Then comes the second path, genetic evidence. Over 42 partner labs have now been authorized across North America, Europe, and the Caribbean, including new centers in Atlanta, Toronto, Kingston, and Paris to conduct ancestry DNA testing that identifies sub-Saharan lineage with a minimum 62% match. The tests are voluntary, confidential, and state-funded for applicants under 26 or from low-income households. In Jamaica alone, over 9,000 young people signed up in the first 72 hours after the decree. And the third requirement? Security clearance. Every applicant must undergo a dual-layer background check. That includes an interview conducted by certified United Africa officers stationed at embassies, followed by a vetting process that evaluates affiliation with extremist organizations, foreign intelligence, or hostile networks. This isn't about exclusion, it's about protection. As Traore stated in his 7th of August press briefing, we open the doors to our brothers and sisters, not to those who sold us yesterday or plan to destabilize us tomorrow. It's a legal renaissance and a psychological reckoning. For too long, being African was treated as an origin to escape. Now, it's a nation being rebuilt, one identity at a time. From Bronx to Banjul, Bridgetown to Bamako, descendants of exile are being asked not just where they're from, but who they're ready to become. The question is not just, can you prove your bloodline, but something deeper. Can you carry this passport with dignity, memory, and responsibility? And if so, are you truly ready to return not just to a land, but to a history reborn? It was the sentence that turned cheers into silence. Not everyone will be given the passport. The 7th of August, 2025, Ouagadougou. Just hours after announcing that the United States of Africa passport would be open to the global African diaspora, President Ibrahim Traoré delivered the second half of his message, calm, firm, and unshakably clear. This was not a blanket invitation. This was a covenant, and not all hands would be trusted to hold it. Traoré's voice didn't rise, but his words struck like thunder. We are not issuing passports to those who insult this continent, who exploit it, or who think they can wear our name without carrying our truth. From that moment, the line was drawn not between black and white, north and south, but between those who love Africa and those who've only learned to profit from her wounds. According to Burkina Faso's Ministry of Legal Integration, the passport program includes a strict moral clause backed by Article 19C of the Sovereignty Act. Applications from individuals who have publicly defamed African nations, mocked their people, or dismissed African cultural dignity may be flagged for rejection. But it goes deeper. Religious or political organizations attempting to co-opt the passport initiative for recruitment, ideology, or propaganda will be permanently barred. Intelligence agents, hostile NGOs, or individuals affiliated with foreign destabilization campaigns, whether through funding, false narratives, or cyber operations, face a 10-year ban. Traore was unequivocal. This is not a trophy, it is a responsibility, and those who fake their way in will be kept out. Already, over 140 flagged applications, mostly from self-proclaimed Afro-influencers linked to controversial movements or platforms, have been frozen for investigation. In Miami, a well-known figure who mocked Burkina Faso's economic model online was denied access, despite having verified ancestry. In Marseille, a political activist attempted to use a forged genealogy document only to face criminal charges under international documentation fraud protocols. It's not about vengeance, it's about integrity. Because a passport, in this context, is not just a right of travel, it is a vow of return, of remembrance, of rebuilding, and not everyone is ready to honor that vow. The border now is not a gate, it's a mirror, and the question it asks is simple. Do you seek Africa because you love her, or because you want to use her name? And when the mirror looks back, what will it see? By the third week of August 2025, the numbers were no longer symbolic, they were staggering. Over 2.7 million applications had poured in, from Chicago to Cap Haitien, from Birmingham to Bridgetown. The capital of Burkina Faso, Ouagadougou, was no longer just a political center. It had become the beating heart of a historical reunion. Inside the National Integration Hall, fluorescent lights stayed on 24 hours a day. The newly expanded Passport Issuance Center, once designed to handle 50,000 documents a year, was now processing 400,000 per month. And it still wasn't enough. President Traoré ordered what he called Operation Korim, a reference to the Mossi word for repair. The goal? overhaul the entire system within 21 days. 1,200 new civil staff were recruited, trained in biometric processing and diaspora verification. Advanced equipment arrived from South Africa and Kenya: iris scanners, DNA sample readers, real-time database cross-checks. Separate wings were built for security interviews, including psychological screening, motivation assessments, and background analysis. What once took 4 months to process could now be completed in 6 weeks. But the strain was real. On the 11th of August, applicants camped overnight in front of the WAGA 2000 Civic Hall. A woman from Trinidad fainted after standing in line for 11 hours. A retired professor from Louisiana wept quietly after his file was approved, whispering, "I thought I'd die without a home." To ease the burden, the governments of Barbados, Jamaica, and St. Lucia agreed to open satellite passport offices on their own soil by mid-September. These would issue provisional certificates of identity while documents were verified in Ouagadougou. The Caribbean was no longer a waiting room, it was now an extension of the African state. But the urgency wasn't just logistical, it was spiritual. "We are not building a passport office," said Minister of Integration Alimata Zongo. "We are building a bridge that should have existed 400 years ago." This was not a bureaucratic challenge. It was a race against time, against trauma, against a silence that had lasted centuries. And every delay felt like history slipping through the cracks again. So the question isn't just how fast we can process the past. It's this: how do we build systems strong enough to carry a people who were once never meant to return? They came with documents, but what they received was a home. The 14th of August, 2025, under the scorching Sahel sun, dozens of new arrivals stepped onto the red soil of Ouagadougou International Airport. Some carried DNA certificates. Others had temporary ID cards issued from United Africa embassies in New York, Bridgetown, and Marseille. But none of them came just for a passport. They came for something deeper, a return long overdue. To meet the flood of requests, President Ibrahim Traoré issued Executive Order 45A, establishing the Ministry of African Resettlement and Identity, the first institution of its kind on the continent. Its mandate? Go beyond paperwork, deliver real reintegration. Within 10 days, 600 resettlement units were deployed across 4 provinces. The ministry began offering free housing for families, temporary residence ID for those awaiting passports, and access to tax-exempt business zones for diasporans willing to invest. Children under 16? Automatic access to public education, tuition-free for 5 years. And for elders over 60? Lifetime residency with medical support. But the policy wasn't just administrative, it was emotional. At the Welcome Center in Koudougou, a Haitian woman in her 60s collapsed in tears while holding her resettlement certificate. 400 years forgotten. Now, Africa calls my name. A man from Georgia whispered into the soil before standing upright. My great-great-grandfather died picking cotton. I came to plant something new. The ministry partnered with African Airlines to secure low-cost repatriation flights. By the end of August, 8,000 seats had been subsidized. Ethiopian Airlines, Air Côte d'Ivoire, and Air Burkina launched special return home routes, slashing ticket prices by 70%. In airports around the world, gates once marked with departures now symbolized arrival not just into a country, but into belonging. The legal structure is firm. Resettled citizens will retain dual nationality under the revised Burkina Faso Citizenship Act, ratified the 3rd of July. But the political message is bolder. Africa is not a visa. It is a right, and it no longer asks permission. So this moment asks us something deeper than logistics or law. Can a continent long fractured by history truly become whole again, one returning soul at a time? And if so, who else is ready to come home? The 6th of August, 2025. The continent didn't just speak, it roared. At precisely 10 a.m. GMT, the African Reconnection Accord was signed in Ouagadougou. Cameras flashed, legal seals were stamped, and the announcement was read aloud in 11 languages: French, English, Arabic, Swahili, Yoruba, Wolof, Amharic, Zulu, Lingala, Haitian Creole, and Jamaican Patois. The message was unified, thunderous, and irreversible. No person of African descent shall ever need a visa to walk upon the land of their ancestors. It was more than policy, it was a rupture. A break from centuries of borders carved by conquest and a clear declaration of continental ownership over identity. 39 African nations, from Senegal to South Sudan, from Mali to Mozambique, formally recognized the United States of Africa passport as visa-exempt within their jurisdictions. The agreement triggered automatic legal alignment under the revised Continental Free Movement Protocol, and by sundown, airports in Dakar, Lomé, Kigali, and Lusaka had updated their entry systems to accept the new document. In a single stroke, the chains of gatekeeping were shattered. The legal foundation was airtight under Article 8 of the Pan-African Sovereignty Charter. All African origin individuals, regardless of birthplace, are entitled to land access, economic participation, and legal protection across the African Union, with Burkina Faso and its regional bloc, the Alliance of Sahel States, leading implementation. Those countries refusing recognition face immediate suspension from inter-African trade deals, a clause triggered automatically after 30 days of non-compliance. The political response? Predictably divided. Western media outlets like Le Monde and The Guardian labeled the move a global risk and continental overreach, suggesting it could destabilize immigration systems and embolden populist movements. Think tanks in Washington called it a soft border revolt, but in Kumasi, in Kingston, in Kano and Atlanta, the language was different. "This isn't rebellion," one youth activist in Cape Town said. "It's resurrection." The streets of Bamako filled with drummers. In Trinidad, churches and mosques held joint gatherings. Hashtags like #No Visa on My Motherland and #Reconnection Day trended across X and TikTok. A new holiday was born. The 6th of August was officially declared African Reconnection Day across 22 countries, with flag-raising ceremonies, ancestral naming rituals, and national moment of silence observances for those lost to the Middle Passage. At the heart of it all, President Traoré stood unmoved by criticism. "Let them worry," he said. "We are healing. For the first time, we are not asking to be accepted, we are deciding to belong." But this is more than symbolic. Airlines have rerouted flights. Border control systems have been reconfigured. Schools are rewriting curricula to include the histories of the Caribbean, the Americas, and Afro-Europeans. From a bureaucratic shift grew a cultural awakening. And yet, deeper questions remain. If Africa is finally reopening its doors to her global children, what kind of house are we building for them to come home to? And will the world respect a continent that has stopped waiting for permission and started writing its own terms? It was never just about the passport. That message became undeniable on the 15th of August, 2025, when President Ibrahim Traoré stood before the African Integration Council in Ouagadougou and outlined something that stunned even his closest allies. The document granting identity was only the first step. What followed would be far more ambitious: the construction of a functional, unified black nationhood across borders, across oceans, across centuries. Traoré unveiled a multi-phase strategy that reframed the Passport Initiative as Phase 1 of a continental project. Schools, housing, healthcare, and economic protection not for tourists, but for returnees. A people once displaced by chains would now return to foundations built in stone. First, education. A $42 million initiative is underway to expand reconnection schools in Burkina Faso, Senegal, and Ghana. $42. These institutions will teach both national and Pan-African history, replacing shame with memory and silence with pride. Teachers are being recruited from the diaspora, with credential recognition expedited under the 2025 Cultural Restoration Act. Second, housing and welfare. In Koudougou and Bobo Dioulasso, 3,500 new homes are being built under the African Homeland Housing Program. Returnees receive a one-time grant to help settle, plus free public healthcare for their first 3 years, funded by the new Pan-African Solidarity Fund. The goal? Not just reintegration, but restoration. Third, a common economy. Traoré confirmed that Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are in early talks to pilot a unified digital currency backed by gold. designed for cross-border trade and diaspora investment. This currency would serve as the financial spine of what Traore calls the United Africa Federation, a long-term vision of continental defense, welfare harmonization, and foreign policy sovereignty. African embassies in Washington, Toronto, Sao Paulo, London, and Paris are now opening United Africa Desks offices, tasked with handling repatriation, logistics, citizenship processing, and legal consultation. This is not a symbolic outreach, it's institutional infrastructure for global Black citizenship. And so the question is no longer if the diaspora belongs. It's, what kind of world are we willing to build when the displaced finally return with open eyes, full hearts, and legal recognition? Because what was once scattered is now being reassembled, not in theory, not in rhetoric, but in brick, classroom, passport, and law. Across oceans and timelines, something is changing, not in silence, but in voices, shaking, breaking, reuniting. In Kingston, Jamaica, a mother held up her new United Africa passport on national television and broke down in tears. "My ancestors never got to return, but I will. I will touch the land for them." In Chicago, a teacher live-streamed the moment she received her identity document, her hands trembling, eyes full of disbelief. In Trinidad, a grandfather kissed the passport 3 times and said, "They told me I was lost, but I was never lost, just stolen." These are not moments of nostalgia. These are acts of redefinition. This isn't about what the world once called you. It's about what you now call yourself. One American artist put it best during a community ceremony in Accra. "I'm no longer just Black. I'm African, and the world can't deny it anymore." The crowd erupted, not in applause, but in silence. The kind that says, "We hear you. We feel you. We are you." In the final address of the national broadcast, President Ibrahim Traoré stood beneath the Sahel sun and spoke without a script. For 500 years, we were broken into names, borders, and silence. But today, we do not ask to return. We return, not in chains, but in honor. And so, from gold-dusted villages in Burkina Faso to the neighborhoods of Detroit, Birmingham, Port-au-Prince, and Paris, this moment is not just history. It is possibility. It is healing turned into law. It is pain turned into policy. It is diaspora becoming nation. The passport is just the beginning. The real journey begins with what we choose to do next with our names, our land, our children, and our story. Because we were never truly gone. We were simply waiting for someone to open the door. So now, we ask you, wherever you are, will you walk through it? Or will you keep waiting for permission from a world that was never built for your return? Save this story. Share it with someone who's still searching. And leave a comment. What does home mean to you when it's no longer just a place, but a right?